There is a place that is spoken about only in whispers, a dark area that spawns the beginnings of urban legends, a place where anything can happen and usually does. During the light of day, it hides just outside of view, but when the sun goes down, spirits, creatures of the night, roam free, and things do go bump in the night. It is in every state and every country, and there is no escaping it, no matter how safe you feel behind your locked doors and latched windows. So we invite you to turn down the lights and turn up your radio while we join Dave Schrader and Tim Dennis, your hosts, on a journey into the darkness on the edge of town.
Good evening and welcome to the Darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Radio Show. I'm your host, Dave Schrader, along with me, Mr. Tim Dennis. Good evening, Tim.
Good evening.
Well, I just had a pretty interesting time out at Alcatraz Island, going out and ghost hunting last night.
Did you get bugged?
I might have.
Right,
I did not. I made sure to wear my soap on a rope while investigating the entire time.
Very nice.
I'm going to finish through some of my evidence that I've got, well, some of the video and audio, to see if we can share anything here online, maybe in the next week or two. So I wanted to mention that. We've got some cool stuff coming up. I wanted to make a mention for next week. We're going to be talking about dead famous people without Chris Fleming.
Can we do
it?
that? Isn't that trademarked?
I don't know. You'd think. We're actually going to be talking to a medium who helped to channel both Jim Morrison and Michael Hutchins for a brand new book that's out. And it just seems really interesting. Her name is Kathleen. Oh, my gosh, Tim. Horrible host here. Kathleen, and it is
Turner.
Very Italian last name, and my mind just went completely kaput on me.
Cabrizzi.
Kathleen Tucci, that's it. Kathleen Tucci is going to join us and talk about the deaths of both these two rock legends, and we're going to chat a little bit about what really went on.
Wait, time out. Michael Hutchins is a rock legend?
Yeah, man, whenever they die before their time, they automatically get legendary status.
Okay.
So maybe if we off ourselves, this show will become legendary.
Sweet.
We should do it on air.
Well,
Think about it. Let's just let it stew. All right, we're going to be talking to them. We're also going to be talking about Haunted Hollywood. So you're going to want to join us here next week, my friends. You're sure to get a smile from Seven Stranded Castaways here on Darkness Isle. We've got a lot of great stuff going on. I want to make a quick mention here. We do have a special deal going on. Most of our trips are sold out for the year, as you can see. We only have the Queen Mary still open. We're over half sold out on that for December 2008. I do have a really great trip that's coming up here that we're a part of that is taking place in May, the second weekend of May. It's Ghost Stock with Patrick Burns from Haunting Evidence, John Oliver from Haunting Evidence. Mm-hmm. I'm going to be out there. Michael and Marty Perry are going to be out there. We've got a great lineup of speakers. You can go to ghoststock.com. That's GHOSTOCK.com. And sign up for it. Here's some of the cool stuff that's going to be going on. We're going to enter everybody that attends into a drawing. If you're there, you get your name entered into a drawing to win 2 free passes and a hotel room at the Stanley for our sold-out event in November. So the only way to win is to attend, so make sure you show up for that. Also, we have a special deal in place with Ghost Stock. Darkness Radio is picking up 20% of the tab for you. So normally they're $150 tickets. You sign up, I think you get them for now $120 or whatever to go. You get 2 people in for $200. It's only $100 each because we're picking up part of the deal. Groups of 6 or more, you get even a bigger discount. So check it out. Please join us. It's going to be a lot of fun out there. Again, go to ghoststock.com. Now, I just alluded to the fact we're going to be out at the Queen Mary again in December, and we just got the sold-out November Stanley event. One of our guests that we have joining us for the first time at the Darkness Radio TAPS Paranormal Retreats is our guest for this evening for the first hour. We have on the line with us Mr. Jeff Belanger, and he's joining us to talk to us about the ITC and the history of it. Tim, I want to talk about everything from beginning of EVP collection all the way up to a lot of the current day methodology that's going on. And in hour 2, we've got Bill Chappelle or Chappell. Is it Chappell or Chappelle, Tim?
I thought it was Chappelle, but
all right, Dave Chappelle.
Dave Chappelle.
Dave Chappelle will be joining us.
He'll be with us going, Darkness.
Yeah.
I'm recording
We've got
stuff.
Bill Chappell will be joining us in the second hour, and we're going to be talking about some brand new ITC equipment that he's created. But now let's go to the phone lines and welcome back to the Darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Radio Show, Mr. Jeff Belanger, right, Jeff? Belanger?
You got it.
All right. See, I always want to say Bellinger, but
Yeah, well, just don't call me late for dinner, right?
that's right. See, we got our friend Michelle Belanger, who spells her name like yours, and she has a new pronunciation for it. So it's hard
Isn't
to
that
keep all
funny?
these names straight, man. You guys got to get together and just go with one statement, all right? Just one name.
You know what's funny? In France or Canada, that's how you pronounce it, Belanger.
Belanger.
But I've been going with Belanger.
Belanger, because you're
'Cause
you're
I'm a Yankee.
American-eyed, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to talk to you. We asked you to actually join us on the trips, and you're going to be doing talks on ITC, and I wanted to kind of discuss this because we just had a pretty interesting thing happen at the Stanley event a few weeks ago. We had Frank Sumption, the creator of the Frank's Box, and we had Bill Chappell, or Chappell, who's our guest in the second hour. And Bill has created digital dowsing rods and a whole new slew of ITC equipment. And it seems like stuff is coming faster and more furious as we go along. I wanted to go back, though, and start talking about the history, and you seem very knowledgeable about all of this. I wanted to go back in time with you and see if you can kind of enlighten all of our listeners here. When did the idea of ghost communication, aside from seances, begin with electronic devices? I mean, from what I remember, it was kind of stumbled on accidentally, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think it's always been an accident, but if we could start in the year 1839,
Excellent.
that was the year that.
Gee, Mr. Peabody, I'll set the Wayback Machine.
Take us back. Hey, Rocky. Sorry. 1839 was the development of the daguerreotype camera, and that was really the first viable camera. Certainly, there was photography before that. And the concept goes back further than that, but this was a viable camera that you could take pictures with a reasonable shutter speed, about a minute or so, and you could capture an image and keep it. Now that aside, then the next stop on our trip through time, we have to go to March 31st, 1848, and that was, of course, the birth of the spiritualist movement in Hydesville, New York, where the Fox sisters, Kate and Margaretta and Leah Fox, were living in an alleged haunted farmhouse, heard some knocks on the wall, sent some intelligence to them, and started communicating. The reason this event is important is because there's actually a lot of tools, ideas, and concepts, part of paranormal investigation and spirit communication, that trace its roots to this one event. Now, whether it was fraudulent, not fraudulent, mistaken, or not, I have no idea. But I do know that a movement started that very night there, Friday, March 31st, 1848. So now we have the idea of seances and spirit communication as part of a belief system in religion. Now remember, I said 1839 we've got the daguerreotype. In 1855 we've got our very first reports of spirit photography. And a lot of those reports, more or less, were simple problems with the camera. This was still new technology. Lots of people didn't know quite how to use it. So, there might be a light leak that would look like, something angelic coming out of heaven, or some bright, light being burned onto the image. And then there were things like double exposures. Like if you forgot to take the plate out of the camera and you open the lens again, if you open the shutter again, a new image would burn onto that plate, and you'd have double exposures, a person who might look like a ghost. So that's 1855. Just, less than 20 years after the invention of the camera, we start to have these reports. In the 1870s...
Which is actually, don't you think that's kind of interesting that it took that long for the reports to happen? You would think that in the infancy there would be a lot more bugs with the original cameras, and there would be a lot more flaws that would appear to be, spirit or light manifestations on film.
I'm sure they were there, but that was before the birth of the spiritualist movement.
Oh, okay.
And so now, once you have this heavy cultural influence of this thing called spiritualism and seances and spirits talking out of walls and things like that, now people are looking at the same phenomena and putting a different spin on it.
Gotcha.
And there's a long history of that, and that's going to be part of my point in a few minutes.
Okay.
But you're absolutely correct. One person's light leak is another person's angel, and it's still that way today.
Good grief. Sorry about that.
One person's music blare is another person's demonic possession. Thank you for making my point. So in the 1870s, you've got this guy named William Mumler who took spirit photography to an absolute art form. And you have to realize this was back in the day where getting a photography portrait, would cost you about 50 cents. Mumler's portraits were $10, but he guaranteed results. And his photos, there's a famous photo of Mary Todd Lincoln with a bearded, tall gentleman standing over her, ghostly figure. And what he did was just a simple double exposure. He was a charlatan. He was run out of Boston, where he was set up shop, when it was discovered that a lot of his ghosts were just out-of-work actors. Oh, really? So that's the 1870s. The 1870s was also the invention of the phonograph. So that was Thomas Edison in December of 1877. Now we can record sound, and this is a whole new dynamic. So 1877, keep that in mind. And then the next stop in time is 1901, where we're now able to take some of these recording devices and make them a little bit portable, even though they're huge and clunky. And Waldemar Bogaras goes to Spain to record a tribal ritual. And he's recording the ritual and claimed that voices were appearing all over, and he was able to capture them on tape, voices that were not coming from people involved in the ritual. So that's really our first account of spirit voices caught on tape, 1901, the first claim of it anyway. And so you've got, 1877, the invention of sound recording, and, less than 20 years later, someone's claiming to, capture a spirit voice on that. And then you look at scientists, people like Thomas Edison. I mean, some would argue he's the father of ITC. In 1922, he was working on a spirit communication device, something that I would say was almost like a telegraph. He described it as something that, was so slight, something that just the slightest force could make the lever move. And he believed that an intelligent entity on the other side would be able to contact this, would be able to manipulate this device in some way. And he was working on it for years. He referenced it in multiple writings and speeches and letters and in his diaries. And
now I thought it was just what's the word I'm looking for here? I thought it was more like a legend that he actually was working on it, that it was something that he had talked about, but there was no actual proof of him starting to create a machine for it.
Well, it's certainly become legend, but there's a book called The Diary and Sundry Observations of Thomas Alva Edison, and there's 2 first editions, and those of you publishing geeks like me would say, well, how can that be? Right. There's only 1 first edition. I actually own both first editions. The book came out in the early 1940s, and one first edition is about 60 pages shorter than the other. And those 60 pages contain all of his thoughts and writings on the afterlife and his attempts at spirit communication. He referenced this device again and again. He talked about not only was he working on it, but he said a colleague of his had recently died, and he felt he would be the first one to work on it. Now, when Edison died, his family claimed that he was just swindled by spiritualists near the end of his life, but that's absolutely not true. When he was in his 30s, he was doing some experiments with magnetism and thought he had discovered something that a European scientist called the Odic force or Odile force, named after the Nordic god Odin, which was this mysterious force that could explain paranormal phenomena. And he thought he discovered it. He even called a press conference saying, "I've discovered this." Now, he even admitted that he was mistaken. It was simple magnetism. But my point was, in his 30s, when he was just 30-something years old, he was looking for it. He was a true man of science. He didn't have formal education. He just didn't know how things worked and wanted to figure it out. Mm-hmm. And I think he looked at spirit communication as just something else, just like the telegraph, just like the light bulb, just like the phonograph. It was just something he didn't understand. He thought it was possible, and he wanted to explore it. And so I've got those 2 books. I've got his own writing, where he references this stuff again and again. Where he says, we need to take this idea out of the hands of charlatans, out of the hands of psychics and mediums. Stop using Ouija boards. We need to put it to science to solve this quandary. And I just think it's very interesting. Now, there's no plans, no device, no prototype has ever showed up. We just have his diary entries that discussed it on many occasions, not just once.
Did they ever give a reason of why the book was released with the original notes and then with it taken out?
Yeah, well, I mean, one can speculate. I talked to a classic book dealer. I got lucky, through the miracle of eBay. I was able to procure both first editions. When the book came out, you have to realize Thomas Edison was one of the founders of General Electric, GE, one of the great big companies of our time. And his family was, of course, very prestigious. I mean, this is one of the greatest inventors of all time. And I think it was an embarrassment to, large institutions like General Electric and like the Edison family when it came out that, my God, this guy did all these great things, the light bulb, the phonograph, moving pictures, all these things. Let's not drag this through the mud. They were embarrassed by it. But it absolutely, if you read it, especially if you read the whole original book, it's right in line with the way he looked at everything, the way he tried to figure out the phonograph, the way he tried to figure out everything else he set his mind to. But yeah, the only speculation is that it was an embarrassment, and they ordered the publisher to remove it. And so the publisher did, pulled books off the shelves, cut out those 60 pages, and re-released it.
Now, wasn't there some rumor at the time, too, that when he began with his recording device, because it used to actually record right onto like a wax disc,
right?
Okay,
right.
That he was getting, actually it wasn't a disc, it was a cylinder, right?
Yeah, it was a cylinder that would just burn, basically record the sound right onto it, right?
Now, I had thought that part of the reason it tweaked him was that he was also getting voices and strange noises that weren't in the room at the time of his recordings, and that's kind of what got him interested in the fact that maybe his equipment could be made sensitive enough to pick up the voices that are kind of out there.
I've heard that too, but I've never seen any writing from Edison that talked about that. And my thought is, after reading, these 60 pages of his notes and thoughts on the afterlife, and after talking to, people that knew his family members and the curators of his, various Edison museums around the country, I really think he would have wrote about it, because it was an observation just like any other, just like he wrote about, his spirit communication observations, even his thoughts on it. He thought that we were all comprised of these things he called life swarms, and that was our personality, our I guess another word for it would be our soul or spirit. And he believed that when we died, those life swarms moved out of us. And his thought was, if they stick together, if these pieces of energy stick together after they leave us, then our intelligence, our personality probably goes with them, and maybe they can come back and affect things. He's an interesting guy. He was a deist, and deists, of course, believe that God was kind of like a watchmaker, that God started the universe and just walked away and said, "You're on your own. Good luck." And so I think he had all kinds of ideas on how the afterlife worked, and had them most of his life. So I have to believe that if he were hearing those voices, he would have written about it. But I haven't seen it.
Okay. Well, go back in. I'm sorry to keep throwing you off the course here. I just wanted to know what your thoughts were on that. So we were at Edison.
Yeah, that's the 1920s, and then we've got other phenomena that starts to occur. The Brown Lady of Raynham Hall in 1936, probably one of the most famous spirit photos of all time. Because now the cameras are getting better and they're getting more accessible to people. And in the 1920s and 30s, there's another phenomena going on, and it's called the miracle of radio. Radio is becoming wildly popular, and to have good radio, you need to get portable. You need audio recording that you can go to sporting events, and you can go to town hall meetings and political rallies and bring it back and quickly get it on the air. And so you've got reel-to-reel audio recording devices that start to come out in the 30s and 40s and 1950s and become smaller, less expensive, and accessible to the masses, just like the camera. And then you've got Frederick Jurgensen in 1959, who goes out into the woods to try to record, sounds of nature, who's a Swedish painter and musician. And in 1957, he bought his first recorder to record some of his singing. And in 1959, he's recording the sounds of nature, plays it back, and he hears voices buried in the sound there. And a lot of people would call this the birth of EVP, electronic voice phenomenon. I would say all of this stuff, spirit photography, all of it falls under the great umbrella that is ITC, or instrumental transcommunication. It's all using technology as a way to kind of reach the other side. And then in 1979, I think modern-day people will say that's the birth of ITC, with Bill O'Neill and George Meek and his Spiricom machine. This was a device that was built, intended solely to communicate with the other side, an absolute two-way dialogue, almost like a telephone, where you could speak. Can you hear me? Yes, I can hear you.
Well, now, can I ask real quick on Friedrich Jurgensen, right?
Yeah.
When he was doing the recording, he was getting voices, but after a while, wasn't he actually getting the voice of his dead father? Am I confusing him with another person in the EVP history? I thought he started getting the voice, and that's what really kind of threw him into understanding that he was dealing with somebody dead, because it was like a family member or somebody's voice was coming through checking in on him.
Well, I don't know that much about Jurgensen.
Okay.
It's possible that's him as well. I do know that he did, once he heard these voices, he went out and tried it again and again to see if he could repeat it, and claimed he could. Claimed he was repeatedly getting voices. So it's possible that at some point he tried to reach out to specific people. But yeah, it's a fascinating field. So again, you've got the 1920s, 1930s. We've got portable audio becoming accessible. 1959, someone's adapting that for spirit communication. And then in 79 with Spiricom, what's interesting about this, though, is that modern ITC practitioners will tell you that intent is everything when doing these kinds of experiments. And they'll tell you that the Spiricom machine worked on intent. Worked on, sure, it required electricity, but it also required belief on the team working on the living side of things and the team working on the spirit side of things. And that for some reason that connection was broken at some point. And though you can still hear a lot of these recordings from Spiricom, you can go to worlditc.org that has a lot of these recordings on their website. They're very monotone. You have to kind of get an ear for it, but you can make out the words once you hear it. And it's so amazing because it was really a two-way dialogue. Can you hear me? Yeah, adjust the ohms this way and that way. It was a completely open dialogue. And I think what we've seen since 1979 is think of all the communication equipment that's exploded onto the scene since the 80s. Computers, fax machines, cell phones. Technology is just exploding now, and now we're seeing things like Frank's box. You mentioned Frank Sumption earlier, and as you said, it's just new devices are coming online all the time. People are taking this equipment and trying to adapt it for the purpose of spirit communication, and it's a practice that goes all the way back to the mid 1800s when they said, "Hey, here's a camera. Maybe it can take a picture of the other side. Here's audio recording." People that practice ITC will focus their intent on fax machines, focus their intent on telephones not plugged in. Any kind of recording or communication equipment that's out there today, I've heard of someone claiming to get results. Whether it's video feedback loop, where you take a video camera and point it at your television so it's showing what's the video camera seeing, and it just creates this kind of bouncing picture. Computers, where people are getting email from the dead, or other kinds of communication, even text communication on their computer, fax machines, telephone calls from the dead, cell phone calls from the dead. The reports just come in, and sometimes it seems to almost be an accident, and other times it seems to be kind of like focused intent.
Well, let me ask you about that now. I know talking to you, you definitely have a good skeptical side on things with the paranormal involved. As we keep talking about intent, which is basically wishing really hard, right? It's that focus. What do you think is more viable, that we're actually reaching, in your opinion, are we reaching the other side, or is it the focus of, you and I want to hear Grandpa Joe come through today?
Right.
And is it our own ability to influence energy that may be creating a false Uncle Joe or Grandpa Joe to come through? So it's not actually a spirit, but perhaps a physical manifestation of our intent.
I think first of all, I think a lot of the quote communication that's coming through is just a phenomenon called pareidolia, where you're creating patterns out of chaos. Especially you've got like a video feedback loop. The screen is jumping and garbling all over the place, and you freeze it and look at it frame by frame, and you say, "Look, I see the outline of a person. That's Grandpa Joe."
Right.
If you just took that picture on the street and said, "Excuse me, what do you think this is?" They'd go, "I have no idea. A bunch of pixels," So in that case, it's just wishful thinking that's creating these things. Some of the EVP you hear, which I guess you'd call like Class C, where it's just like rah 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 rah,
Right.
And people say, it says, "I'm here, Uncle Joe,"
Right.
And you say, I don't hear that. In fact, I don't hear anything.
You referred to it as what? What was the title you gave it?
Well, like pareidolia, the idea of creating of looking for patterns.
Okay, so also matrixing is, I think, what a lot of people are.
Sure.
The newer version, just so we're understanding, it's the same type of phenomenon, right? It's the brain is always looking for recognizable patterns.
In speech and in sight from birth. From birth, we're hardwired to do it. And so, I mean, you look at the Rorschach ink blots from the 1920s that are still used today in psychology. Normal cognitive adults are supposed to find, human patterns, faces, body parts, things like that. And normal cognitive children tend to find animal shapes. It's just, just how the thing works.
Well, Jeff, we got to take our first break here. We'll take our break. We'll be right back. You're listening to the Darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Radio Show. We're glad you do. We're here with you every Sunday night from 10 to midnight Central Time. We'll be right back with more and more with Jeff Belanger right after this.
It will keep you on the edge of your seat.
I must have drank me about 15 Dr. Peppers.
I gotta pay.
Just don't get any on the floor. Hurry back. There is more to come from the Darkness on the Edge of Town. You hear footsteps and things bumping and banging in the middle of the night. Could it be paranormal activity? Or is it just Dave and Tim raiding your fridge?
Beer.
Strange things happen in the darkness on the Edge of Town.
Welcome back to the show. You're listening to Darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Radio Show. Join us in our live chat room. Just go into darknessradio.com, click on the Listen tab. There you'll see a link that'll take you right into the live chat room. During the show, you can go in and chat with other like-minded paranormal enthusiasts, talk about the show, share your thoughts, ideas, make fun of us, whatever you'd like to do. We're going to get back into tonight's show. We're talking about ITC, EVP communications, spirit communication, whatever title you want to give it. And our guest this evening is author and paranormal researcher, Mr. Jeff Belanger. There we go. How's that better, Jeff?
Yeah, I think we've done it 3 ways now.
I told Tim during commercial here, I just want to, every time I reintroduce you in and out of commercial, we're just going to come up with a new way to say it.
That's fine. I think it'd be Smith by the end of the show.
Exactly.
That's fine.
Now, let's go forward again. Now, dealing with ITC, now, what are your take on the different ways of communication out there? Do you put much stock in it? Have you actually seen something you thought was a really good form of spirit communication and photograph that you were witness to, or EVP, or immediate contact?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think EVP is really some compelling stuff right now. I mean, when you ask a question and you get an answer in that's in context to the question you just asked, especially if there's some historical significance, to the location or something like that, and it's really clear. I mean, what we would call Class A, meaning if you played it for 10 separate people and said, "What does it say?" they would all agree. I mean, that's really incredible stuff. And with things like Frank's box and some of this new equipment that's coming out, when you're getting answers to specific questions, I just don't think that that's random luck. You know what I mean? I think there's really some compelling stuff coming out there, which is probably what's driving the development of this technology so much right now. I think that's a big part of it. You've got people that are getting results and saying, "Wow, what else can we do? What else can I put together that'll get even better results?" So I think that's why we're seeing an even bigger acceleration than ever before right now. So yeah, I mean, EVP, of course some photographs come across now again that you're just like, wow, assuming I'm not being faked out here,
right?
Assuming Photoshop wasn't involved. Wow, how do you explain that? What could this possibly be?
No, it was kind of interesting. You mentioned earlier about the gentleman that was faking the photograph of Mary Todd Lincoln with the ghost of Abraham Lincoln.
Right.
And actually, Houdini had come out and has a very famous photograph that he did where he appears to be sitting there showing a book to the spirit of Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah, yeah.
And he got really good at being able to fake the pictures and knock them off just about as cleanly as everybody else was out there knocking them off. Do you think, though, I mean, that's what I always find is funny with the skeptics and the cynics in the field is if it can be reproduced, that automatically dismisses it as having maybe at one time been paranormal activity.
Yeah, I mean, there's always the problem of charlatans. There always have been charlatans.
Sure.
I mean, for millennia there have been, and there will be. And that's the problem. You're right. Just because you can reproduce it doesn't mean that it's all fake. And just because there's some fakes doesn't mean that everything's fake. That's one of the problems we run into again and again. The great news is that with a lot of this ITC stuff, it's really not all that expensive and not all that difficult. EVP, you can go pick yourself up an audio recorder for $20. Don't take our word for it, folks. That kind of thing.
Exactly.
Go try it. Go someplace. Try it. But I think one of the things I've heard again and again from people that really get serious about this is it's a spiritual endeavor. I think some people fool themselves when they think that they're being purely scientific by having a piece of technology with them. You still have to have some belief that there's something out there to communicate with in order to use it, and then it gets a little muddy. It's not purely an act of science that you're undertaking. It's an act of spirituality in some respects. You're trying to communicate with the other side, and so intent counts. Talk to any religious person; they'll tell you. If you say a prayer but don't mean it, it doesn't mean anything. It's the intent behind the prayer. It's the belief in the symbology of that belief system. That affects the outcome. And so I think it's no different with ITC. And one of the other things I've noticed, too, in trying a lot of these things for myself, but really tinkering, just in the interest of full disclosure, it's almost like playing a musical instrument. I could show anyone how to play a C chord on a piano. I could show you which three keys to press down at the same time, and you'll make a C chord. But that doesn't make you Mozart. But for some reason, some people start playing with the piano, and it speaks to them. It stirs something inside of them, and they're driven to become really good at it, virtuosos, talented, whatever word you want to use. And I think it's the same with a lot of this ITC stuff. Some people are just drawn to EVP, to work with it, to get better and better at it. I'm not one of those people. I seem to be a repellent, when I pull out my audio recorder. But some folks really work at it, and then others, it's spirit photography. And for some of the folks I know who get pretty incredible results regularly, they'll tell you, I don't just click pictures randomly in some cemetery. I say a prayer. I meditate before I do it. I speak my intent, and then these are the results I get. And I find that very interesting. It's almost like an alchemy kind of practice. We're combining the technology that is the camera or audio recorder or whatever with the belief that there are ghosts, and I can use this device to channel, or to make some kind of contact.
Well, now that's where it gets, really interesting to me, because we think about that often. As I always say, try to be polite when you're asking for EVPs, and try to do this and do that. Maybe by making your intent known up front, that will open up whatever conduit or natural block you may have up there that's keeping us from seeing the things. Because you listen to a lot of the experts or a lot of the people in the field that can sense spirits or see them. As they say, we all have the ability, but we started blocking it at an early age because we were told that we're not supposed to see ghosts.
Sure.
So maybe by giving and delivering the intent up front, see, that makes a lot of sense to me, that might help you, almost like in a self-hypnosis style, remove the mental block you have toward experiencing the paranormal.
I'm sure there's something to that. I have no doubt. And not only that, you have to assume that you're trying to communicate with what's most likely a human being, a person who's passed on. And so if that's the case, you have to put yourself in their shoes and say, okay, if I'm a person walking down the street and someone just has a microphone out saying, hey, talk to me, are you going to run over and talk to them? You might, but you do it as a goof, right?
Right, exactly.
But if someone says, hey, excuse me, could I talk to you for a minute and just ask you something? You might be more inclined to just stop for a second and say, yeah, what would you like to know? And but the intent has to be there. You have to look at the person, and judge this person and say, okay, I don't think I'm going to be made a fool of. I think this person actually wants to communicate with me. And so it makes all the sense in the world. But again, it's not purely scientific, because you have to have the belief that there's an intelligent entity out there that can communicate with you and would want to. And I think some of the people that take this more seriously, they're getting good results, and rightfully so.
All right, let's go back into more of the history. I know I want to cover quite a bit more while we can here.
Sure.
So take us through the rest of history now as we're going through and progressing, how things have changed and where we might end up, or where we're at now and where you think we may end up.
Well, I think what's interesting is that, with the modern-day paranormal investigation movement, where, there's so many groups and things like that, using objects like EMF meters and thermal imaging cameras and IR thermometers and digital voice recorders, I would argue that all that stuff is kind of in the realm of ITC. What's an EMF meter? It measures electromagnetic fields, and
right.
and we're not certain that ghosts are comprised of electromagnetic energy. We don't know that for sure. It's just an idea. It's a theory, or that maybe the electromagnetic field is manipulated when some paranormal activity is going on, and that's what we're measuring. But then there are folks that are using their EMF meters to communicate, or their tri-field meters, spike the needle once for yes, twice for no. People are doing those kinds of things.
And what I've seen, I don't know if you've been witness to this yet, aside from that one episode of Ghost Hunters when Chris Fleming was on there, they did, Chris utilizes his digital thermometer in a way that I actually don't mind having a thermometer with. I've never been one to believe that the thermometer is a good investigating tool anyway.
Right.
Because it can't really register, you're not registering the spirit, you're registering whatever the light is hitting.
Right.
So there's no way to really differentiate the gaseous form of a ghost that may be standing there. But he actually asks it to manipulate the temperature. Can you please drop the temperature? Drop it down for us 10 degrees.
Right.
And it would begin dropping, and I've actually watched other people do that so that I knew it wasn't just Chris Fleming figuring out a way to, jury rig the equipment.
Right.
But I've watched other people do it, and that's, again, it's thinking outside the box, if you will, and looking at what do we use currently, and is there another way to use our equipment, and that is a form of ITC when it's actually
Absolutely.
communicating with us by violating all known physics and changing the temperature. That's pretty impressive.
Right. And using the device for something it was never ever intended to be used for, like you said, right? Drop the temperature for for yes or no, or to absolutely.
I don't know if you heard this at the last Queen Mary event we did. Chris Fleming and another gentleman had the thermometers, and they were side by side, and they were holding it and pointing it to the exact same location. And he started talking. His went to 85 degrees. The gentleman's next to him went down to 58 degrees.
Huh.
So they had 85, 58 registering, and it would hold there until he'd say, okay, thank you, and then it would go back up, and they'd even out and come to the regular temperature again.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, so watching it influence. And then we also watched the K2 meters. Patrick Burns had two K2 meters about a foot apart from each other, and they had the switch built in on the side so your thumb couldn't manipulate them. And we were watching two K2 meters simultaneously respond to questions, and then they would say, could you just make this one work? And only one would work.
Right.
And then he'd go, okay, how about over to this one? And then that one would begin working. So, I mean, that's where again, now I don't know, is that because there's so many people focused on that one piece? Are we manipulating it with our minds ourselves? I guess that's almost as far-fetched as believing that a ghost is there manipulating it, right?
It would still be worth further study.
Right.
If that's a power of our minds that we don't understand yet, that really deserves further study. And if it's a ghost, it deserves further study. So the good news is, no matter what, it deserves further study. But yeah, absolutely, that's all in the realm of ITC, and that's why when I see some of the paranormal investigative groups going out with all this equipment saying, oh no, we use purely science, we don't use any esoteric means at all, and I kind of sit there and go, yes, you do. You really are. You just can't turn this into a scientific question the way we understand science today. It can't be done. There has to be some realm of belief in there and some realm of intent. When you're going about this work, it's just how it is. And those are great examples, like you said, manipulating the various devices that people are applying to paranormal investigation. I mean, these tools were never built for that. They were built to measure, meat in factories.
Exactly.
So you don't touch it.
Let's take our second break here. We'll come back. We'll have about 12 to 15 minutes to wrap up with you. You're listening to the Darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Radio Show. We'll be back with more right after this.
Once you have seen Dave and Tim in the light, you'll understand why we must return to the darkness on the edge of town. Stay tuned. There is more to come. This show is so frightening, it'll scare the pants off you.
Beat it.
It's people with a dirty mind that think like that.
On second thought, maybe you should just keep them on.
You'd be amazed how often I hear that.
Welcome back to the darkness on the edge of town with Tim Dennis and Dave Schrader.
And welcome back to the show. You're listening to Darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Radio Show. Remember, if you can't listen live, all of our shows are archived on our website. You can go to darknessradio.com, click on the Listen tab, and the last 2.5 years' worth of shows are all listed right there for you to tune in. This is, I believe, our third time that we're talking tonight with our guest. Our guest is Jeff Belanger, and he is an author. He is a paranormal researcher. And Jeff, why don't you go ahead and give people your website and information so they can get in touch with you and see all the wonderful things you do.
Sure. You can always find me lurking at ghostvillage.com. That's the website I started back in '99, and it's a global community. We're here to promote all the good work being done in the paranormal. We've got a news feed that lots of other paranormal websites run, and feature articles, and a big old message board where people are having the discussion 24/7.
Very cool. Now we only have about 12 minutes left. Let's take a look at the rest of ITC and kind of bring us up to current times.
Sure. Well, we've been talking about some of the ghost hunting equipment that people have adapted for paranormal investigation, and as you pointed out, beyond just looking for temperature spikes and EMF spikes, now using it as absolutely a form of ITC, using it for manipulate the equipment in order to communicate with us, and that's so interesting. And I think those kinds of events are driving people to say, well, what can I build? Frank's box is kind of sort of like a random number generator, right? Except it's scanning frequencies, and the randomness is what makes it kind of authentic. And through that randomness, if something comes out, then it must have been manipulated by some outside force, some intelligent outside force. And that's what's so intriguing about a lot of these devices, is that's something that's been used in parapsychology for decades. Random number generators.
Exactly.
So it's not really a new concept, but people are applying new technologies, to the field. Again, all with the intent of trying to make, spirit contact. And some of these devices are wild. They're absolutely insane. I know we spoke earlier today about your next guest and his digital dowser. I got to try one in Tombstone just a couple of months ago. And I was outside, and we were totally goofing around with it. I had just seen it for about 2 seconds, and I think we said something like, Scotty, beam us up. And the device said, space, attack. And we just kind of all looked at each other, and our eyebrows went up and said, oh.
Now, that's something I want to actually talk to him about. Now, and we'll get into the technology with Bill in the next hour.
Yeah,
but
sure.
The one thing I'm interested in is, how do we know that the software that's used to create that doesn't recognize similar, almost like a thesaurus, like a digital thesaurus?
Yeah, sure.
Right? So if we're saying, we're on a highway here, car, crash, those are things that might be associated with a highway and words that would randomly come up. I mean, it's still interesting that it would be that way, but how do we know that it's not just referencing, it's like a game of, what was that silly game show with Dick Clark in the 70s and 80s, Tim, something pyramid, $10,000 pyramid.
Oh, right, yeah, you could say everything but the word.
Did you see how Tim answered that with, he just looks at me and he stared, and all of a sudden the word popped in my mind. We have
you guys
our own
are
form of
connected
ITC.
without any doubt.
Yeah, but it could be like,
right.
Almost like a $10,000 pyramid deal where you're just giving like things.
Right.
And we're getting responses and things that coincide with that. And I'd like to, we'll talk to Bill more about how that works and see if that's even a possibility.
No, yeah, he would be much better qualified to answer that. But you're right. What is the technology behind this stuff? And it's critical that we know that, and it's critical that those kinds of things are disclosed, so you really recognize the miracle that it is if you do get something that's in context to your question. And that's my hat's off to Frank Sumption, of Frank's Box fame. You just email him and he'll send you the schema for his device. I mean, he discloses everything. This is how I made it. This is how you can make it. By all means, go try and reproduce it. And I think that's such an important part of this. Number one, if it's going to be legitimized, we need to know what it's doing. And then if you start getting results, boy, they're all the more miraculous. If it truly is random. If you say, look, open it up, it's just randomly pulling, radio frequencies and spitting stuff out at random intervals. Wow. What are the odds that it could answer a question you ask at that moment, just pulling from various AM, FM, shortwave, whatever, frequencies?
I had to laugh because I just was at an event this last weekend at the Palmer House in Minnesota, and was there with a few friends just doing a little private investigation, and the one spirit in the basement does not like the leader of the paranormal group that I'm a part of. He's not fond of her at all. And, again, the jury's out on the whole Frank's Box thing. I've heard a couple of really crazy things that I don't understand, but it was interesting as I'm standing in there. we all had our little Radio Shack hack boxes version of Frank's box in our
Right.
hands, and as I said, somebody said, "Oh, look, Lisa's back in here." I heard very clearly it came through and said a very derogatory 4-letter word that starts with a C.
Oh, nice.
And I just kind of had the shocked look, and I'm like, did I just hear what I thought I heard? And I'm like, okay, I'm not going to say anything. And then we were talking, and then it referred to her as a bitch a few seconds later. To me, that was staggering. I'm like, what the heck? Now, these aren't random words you're going to hear, and it wasn't like, like it was coming off there. It came through, bitch.
Huh.
And
some of those words are words you can't say on the radio.
Exactly. And quite a few of us heard it jump over, a couple of the different radios in the room. We were hearing the same names being repeated over and over, things like that. So that's where it starts getting intriguing to me, where it's like, wow, why is it referring to this person Seth? There's no Seth in our group. It just keeps referring to different things that are there. That to me is where it's, when you have somebody like Frank who's doing this, and I really appreciate Frank too, because when you look at what he does make it available for everybody. He wants everybody to kind of experience this and utilize the technology in whichever way they can. It's kind of a shame that so many people are out there, finding, I think, negative ways to use a piece of equipment that wasn't created for,
Right, yeah, no, his intent all along was this is for everyone.
Right.
There's no limits. Yeah, absolutely. And it's so interesting though how we adapt all of this technology, and this goes back, almost 200 years now we've been doing this. And as soon as you had the influence of the spiritualist movement and now we've got the influence of so many paranormal television shows, new ones coming online every day, and so much paranormal media saying, hey, this stuff is out there. It's possible to make contact in various ways. Lots and lots of people are saying, well, how can I do it? I know a thing or two about electrical engineering. Let me start tinkering. And, the good news is, by all means, go for it. Just let us know what you're doing, be open about it and tell us the kind of results you're getting. So ITC is really limitless. And the organization, worlditc.org, is really an intriguing organization. Mark Macy and those folks are pulling a lot of interesting stuff together. Mark Macy's Illuminator. I don't know if you've...
Oh, yeah. We've had him out at the Stanley, I think, the last 3 times that he's brought the Illuminator with and done spirit photography with it.
Well, there you go. I mean, so here's a device that, is in the environment, and then he takes photos, and he's getting interesting results on those photos. Absolutely a new twist on ITC, and who knows what we're going to hear about tomorrow. I mean, it seems like almost weekly you're hearing about some new device, some new concept. And why not? I mean, why not? Whatever you're good at, start tinkering, and it's still a wide open field. And who knows what kind of technology is going to appear in 6 months from now or a year from now that will soon be adapted for this practice.
It's an interesting thought here, just as an aside. And Tim, maybe you can weigh in on this, knowing what you do about recording and audio. If it is a spirit voice that's influencing some kind of energy pattern, it's able to manipulate the magnetic field on a tape, correct? To create this voice. I'm curious, is that right? I mean, is that how tape recording works? Is it manipulates the magnetics?
It manipulates the energy going into the microphone.
Right, but to record on there, it's actually disrupting the magnetic pattern. That's what's creating the voice, correct? On a tape, because isn't it a magnetic strip? Essentially, is what a tape is, or am I?
No, Jeff, and you can weigh in on this too. Basically, it doesn't matter whether it's tape, digital, or otherwise. It's just
right, but I want to go back to like the old tape when they were doing it with like reel to reel, and they were doing it with the micro cassette and handheld recorders. Which that's what I started with, one of those clunky black recorders when I was a kid, and I used to do little radio shows in my room, and I'd play them back, and there'd be other voices on the tape. But it's essentially it's something that's creating a pattern on that magnetic strip, correct?
Well, again, anything that's coming through any recording device has to go through a microphone. So that's theoretically what's being pushed. Energy is being pushed through the microphone.
Right, but the tape itself, is it magnetic?
The tape is passive. It's recording whatever is coming through the microphone.
Okay, but is tape magnetic? Is that how it records things? Okay, so as it's doing that, I'm wondering, and just kind of a funny aside, we watch like shows like Dead Famous and a couple of these other shows where they've left like Scrabble pieces.
Right.
And asked for the spirits to manipulate it. It'd be kind of funny. I was sitting here thinking about a joke because Tim thinks he's, a a jinx in the paranormal world. He'll go into someplace, the head's blood pouring out of the walls. He'll walk in and nothing happens, right?
Right.
So I said I could just see Tim with his new form of ITC sitting in a corner with an Etch-a-Sketch. But as I was saying that, I realized that that's actually magnetic powder.
Yeah.
That could do it. And, Tim, we should actually consider, maybe that'd be an interesting toy or tool to take with on an investigation. Leave it in there and see if the powder could be manipulated, if it is an energy form, and as we're finding more and more has to do with the electromagnetic fields, can it manipulate this magnetic powder to create messages to us?
That's so funny.
I bet you $10 it won't do anything when I'm there.
No, not when you're there. But the minute you walk, you walk in out, it's going to say, "Thank God he left," right on the Etch-a-Sketch.
Well, yeah, you have to realize too. I mean, again, a lot of these ideas just aren't that new. Talcum powder, baby powder, flour was ghost hunting equipment. Centuries ago. What you're talking about, like with the Scrabble pieces, those are trigger devices. They seem to be more popular in the UK for some reason than they are here, where people will leave coins and things like that and say, "Okay, mess with them if you're really here," that kind of stuff. But that stuff goes back many, many decades, and you'd look for footprints in the flour in the kitchen that you'd sprinkle on the floor or whatever. And did something really press in, or was it a manipulation of whatever it was in the environment, which at that point was flour or talcum powder, and today is magnetic tape or digital digital media, hard drives, things like that, which might be so slight, so much easier to manipulate than something that's physically in the environment like flour. We don't know, but the results are really interesting, especially when they're very clear and in context to the question that's being asked. I just think that's some really compelling stuff.
Well, Jeff, we've got to get wrapping up here. I got about 2 minutes left. Can you tell me, you said you did the Star Trek Beam Me Up Scotty thing and it started mentioning space. What were a couple of the other things that Digital Dowser said when you talked to me earlier today?
Yeah, well, we were near a road, and we just started talking about, like, my God, there's just no cars out right now, and it said, like, highway, car. So there were things like that where it was just it did seem to almost pick out keywords of our conversation and say something that was at least in context. But the Digital Dowser, and you're going to get a much better explanation than I'll give, is cycling through a set library of words. So these aren't spirit voices; these are recorded voices. So it's the same voice saying every word, but the randomness is what's interesting. And if you're randomly pulling from 500 or 1,000 or 5,000 words, and it gets to be in context with what you're talking about. Beam me up, Scotty. Look at all the stars. Space. Attack. What are the chances?
Exactly.
And actually, you could have a mathematician tell you exactly what the chances are.
Well, Jeff, we're going to be rolling up here. I appreciate you spending an hour with us. We'll have to have you on again soon. And again, people can check out your website at ghostvillage.com, see where you're going to be. Aside from our events, you're going to be at the Stanley in November, the Queen Mary in December with us. We're also going to be out at the TAPS Beyond Reality Radio event, which is going to take place. Is that in June?
No, that's in August. That's going to be up in New Hampshire there at the the Mount Washington Resort. There's something in Gettysburg this summer. There seems to be something going on every month, so check it out.
All right, well, thank you very much for spending some time with us this evening, Jeff. We appreciate it. We'll look forward to talking to you again soon and seeing you out in November and December.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Have a good one. Everybody stay tuned with us. We're going to be back with our next guest right after the top of the hour. We're going to be talking to Bill Chappell, who is the creator of quite a few new ITC forms. We're going to talk to him about that and play some of the different waveforms that he's been able to collect in his work with us. We'll be right back with more.